The controversial mayoral recall petition in New Orleans continues as both sides argue over the legitimacy of the signatures. Matt Sledge, a reporter who's been following the story, gives us a timeline. So the Cantrell administration has been really scrutinized a lot since the pandemic, and now there seems to be a recall petition that's coming out where people want to actually remove her from office. How did New Orleans get here?
So it's a pretty interesting chain of events. Cantrell was widely praised for her handling of the COVID pandemic. She shut down businesses when a lot of business owners didn't want her to. And then in 2021, she ran for re-election for her second term, was able to kind of clear the field. No one with a lot of serious political backing ran against her, and she won a very convincing victory for her second term. Almost immediately, the problems started coming out of the woodwork. Crime was already high in New Orleans post-pandemic, and it just kept going up in 2021 and 2022. And the mayor, her critics would say, just couldn't seem to get a handle on the problem. Her police department never came out with a very convincing plan for how they were going to respond to the rise in crime. Over the course of 2022, in addition to crime, there were all sorts of other issues like roadwork problems. Everybody who's driven around New Orleans knows the streets are a mess. They've been a mess for years at this point. And then there was a series of personal issues, personal controversies involving the mayor that came out. The first big one was the first-class flights she took to overseas destinations on taxpayer expense. The mayor was initially very reluctant to repay taxpayers for those flights. So there was this, kind of soup brewing of issues involving the city and involving the mayor personally. And then on August 26th of last year, two people, one of them Eileen Carter, a former staffer for the mayor, she was actually the mayor's social media manager, and then one Belden Nooneyman Batiste, who's a kind of activist, shows up to a bunch of city council meetings, runs for a lot of political offices. Together they filed a formal notice that they were going to attempt to do a recall of the mayor. That was on August 26th of last year. There was a lot of uncertainty when their efforts started about how serious it was going to be, whether it was going to have legs. And then almost immediately they had a very large signature signing event in Lakeview that drew hundreds and hundreds of people and showed that at a bare minimum there was some enthusiasm for this effort.
So before we talk a little bit more about the recall that's going on right now, first let's backpedal a little bit. I mean, are recalls even common in Louisiana?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Every state has its own rules for how recalls can go forward. Many states don't have any kind of recall at all. Louisiana used to set one of the highest bars for a recall in the nation. You had to have a third of active voters sign your petition. A few years back, a state representative on the North Shore decided that was too high of a bar, so he authored legislation that reduced the trigger from a third to a fifth of registered voters. And that has made it a lot easier to at least attempt to do a recall. That's not to say there have been many successful recall attempts since then. It's still very hard to collect enough signatures to actually get on the ballot. Talking to recall experts, once you do get on the ballot, once voters do have that yes or no question of whether to retain a politician, your odds, your chances of success increase dramatically.
So for this recall petition, I mean, what's the latest on that? Is it likely that this one's going to be successful?
As you and I sit here today, it's really hard to say the answer to that question. The deadline for the recall organizers to turn in their signatures was February 22nd, Ash Wednesday. They did that with a lot of pomp and circumstance. They dropped off the boxes an hour before deadline. They had a brass band playing. They declared victory. But all throughout this process, they have refused to give us a specific number of how many signatures they have collected. So we don't even know their estimate of how many signatures they've collected, let alone how many the Orleans Parish Registrar of Voters, whose job it is to count these things, will say are valid.
So where do you go from here if nobody knows how many signatures you have?
We go ahead to March 22nd. That's the registrar's deadline for verifying these things. And presumably we will know on that date or soon after whether she thinks they have enough valid signatures. Just given the way things have been going, I wouldn't be surprised either way if she says yes, they made it, or no, they didn't get there, if there are more lawsuits, further litigation over all of this.
So suppose this recall is successful. What does that mean for New Orleans?
Well, if this thing goes to a ballot, then there's going to be an up or down vote on the mayor. And if people vote to recall the mayor, we are probably in for months and months of uncertainty about what happens next. One of the city council members will be placed in position as acting mayor, and then there will be another election to replace the mayor for the rest of the term. That could potentially go into a runoff. So we could keep having elections and uncertainty until April 2024.
And there's definitely a new precedent that will be set whenever it comes to recalling politicians as well.
I think so. I think it's very possible we could see more recall campaigns in Louisiana as a result of this.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.